Welcome to the Film Gamer podcast. Usually I don't do news-covered episodes, but there's just so much news to go over that it was overwhelming, and I have to cover a news segment. So here it is for the week ending February 23rd, 2024. A reminder that the Zone of Interest podcast episode is out, where Eric and I go to the movies to see the Zone of Interest. It's a very interesting movie, and as I compose my maybe higher than expected review of it, I debate as the score goes up in my brain. It's a sublime film. I was entranced by it, and yet so little happens in the movie. It's one you gotta see for yourself, for sure. Now, moving on, the Borderlands trailer came out, and it's from producer Avi Arad, who produced Venom, Uncharted, and all the Spider-Man movies. Looking at it, you can tell right away that it's definitely not going to be a critical darling in line with the other movies, but Avi knows better than almost any other producer how to have fun without really having that kind of forced fun that you see in something like Dungeons and Dragons. It's like, yeah, we're having fun, right? No, it's a genuine good time that are had in his movies. I remember watching Venom 2, and it's just, goofy stuff. So I'm in for it. I like Cate Blanchett, a two-time Academy Award winner. Can't go wrong there. That's inspired casting for Lilith. Jamie Lee Curtis is really great. Another Academy Award winner added to the cast. You got Ariana Greenblatt, who's coming off of Barbie, and she looks like good casting for Tiny Tina. And then you have Kevin Hart, who apparently really wanted this role because it was him being serious, a different kind of role for him. In the video game, Roland is more basically Terry Crews, but more serious. So he's kind of stretching out for this. So we'll see how he does. If he does his own thing, I'm fine with that, honestly. I like how with the cast of characters of Borderlands, I played a bit of the first and second. They're mixing up the cast of characters from 1 and 2. So I really am looking forward to it. It looks like a fun time. Eli Roth mentioned his philosophy in an interview for Thanksgiving, that he stopped being precious about his work and, got to work. So this is something really different for him. And in order to do Thanksgiving, he had to drop out during post-production. So he got his friend Tim Miller, who directed Deadpool 1, to do it. And it's just, the humor is there. It looks like a fun time. I'll certainly go see it in theaters. I'm a film gamer, and it's a film game adaptation, so I'm definitely in on it. And Lionsgate seems to be too. Whoever's running that theatrical division there is doing a great job. Shout out to Lionsgate, because they had a $100 million movie in John Wick Chapter 4, stellar reviews. They had The Hunger Games, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, another $100 million movie. Decent reviews. I liked it a lot. And this will hopefully continue that trend and be a blockbuster for them, because usually a lot of their films are made independently and they sell off and they can be kind of cheap. But that doesn't seem to be the case here, because they spent a lot of money, it seems, getting the look right and the cell shading without it looking too cringe or too cheesy. I'm really looking forward to Borderlands. In other movie news, Dune 2 reviews are out, and they are in the mid-90s on Rotten Tomatoes, 94 to 97%. Now, this is a movie that we kind of all knew, barring some colossal mess-up, was going to be acclaimed. It just has the crew for it. It has the best people working in Hollywood. I thought the first one was solid. It performed on the high end of expectations. It won 6 Academy Awards, including a second one for Hans Zimmer, and it made $400 million worldwide, while also being on streaming at the same time. That's pretty incredible, as well as $100 million stateside and opening to $40 million. So it posted really strong numbers. I was really bummed to see it leave the October-November slot that they originally had because of the strike. But, coming in, the calendar being what it is, there's not a lot of big movies coming out. I'm really excited for this, so I will definitely be seeing it in theaters, and all the reviews for it are pretty good. However, True Detective Night Country just wrapped up. You guys know that that's not a great show. I'm happy that it was made. I'm happy they got Jodie Foster. I'm happy that they got a new showrunner in Issa Lopez. I like the setting. I like the ideas behind it. It was easy to watch. It just didn't feel that dense, that original, or frankly, really that interesting. It was all very surface level, and I wanted to dig through the ice. So let me know if you want to hear a review from me on True Detective. I did a season 1 and 2 analysis, which was one of my early hit articles. So I'm wondering, should I do a season 3 and 4 analysis maybe, or just a season 4 review? Because that was one of my early hits of filmgamer.com. Moving on to some rare home video news, Sony is taking over Disney's physical media production, which to me makes up for the time that they gave away the Spider-Man merchandising rights and sold them to Disney for a quick buck. I thought they could have held on to that, but, it's all commerce. I'm sure, they're sound conservative business people. So Sony will now help Disney's physical media division, which will probably unfortunately be laid off for the most of it, and release most of their discs. So now we had a lot of people on TikTok and Twitter freaking out about 28 Days Later no longer being available on DVD or Blu-ray or streaming. The simple thing is that those movies were, and I'll presume it's just the first one that's missing, is that 28 Days Later was distributed by Fox. Fox is owned by Disney, and recently Sony apparently bought the rights to make a sequel called 28 Years Later, which is what they're doing. So that, coupled with that, I'm sure they'll have 28 Days Later remaster out in due time. Interestingly, it's one of the very first digitally shot movies, so it caps out at something like 600 and something p, or 570, so it's not really that much better than the DVD version. So some interesting remastering they'll have to get into, because this is a concern I've had about digital movies, because movies shot on film can upgrade to about 6K. There's a lot of detail there. And of course, there's IMAX, but with digital, that's just it. Movies like Star Wars Revenge of the Sith or Zodiac Cap at 1080p, they're not getting any better. So what are digital movies going to do? I think there's going to be a bit more interesting artistry there, and they're going to have to use AI and lots of fancy software to maintain the look, and probably use something like DLSS, downloading super sampling to, upconvert in a meaningful way. And I'm sure Anthony Dodd Mantle and Danny Boyle will do, a good job overlooking 28 Days Later to remaster it and make sure it gets a proper release. And then I'll look forward to it. But I mean, come on. How many people don't have a DVD copy of 28 Days Later? I mean, that and the sequel 28 Weeks I saw in the bargain bin at Walmart for years. You see it at every library if you want to go to the library, which again you should do, because you get access to Hoopla and Canopy as streaming services. By the way, those use library cards. If you go to those libraries, your nearest library, get a library card, then you can in fact rent movies from the library, physically or digitally. And if that's the case, I guarantee you 28 Days Later will be there. This spookiness that, oh no, physical media is disappearing. Listen, this is the most influential zombie movie of the 21st century. More so than Zack Snyder, although it's his best film, his remake of Dawn of the Dead. This is the premier zombie movie of our time. You think that's just going to go away and nobody's going to be able to watch it? No. It's available everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if there was like a half decent copy on YouTube. You know, everybody who loves it, seen it. So, you know, I'm pretty sure I have a copy somewhere around here if I look for it. Yeah, I just have it right up above me right now. So don't worry, 28 later heads, you'll be fine. Moving on to Warner Brothers trade variety Blowout, Joker 2, Folie à Deux is coming out in October. It stars Joaquin Phoenix, who is being paid $20 million for the film, and the ever-talented Lady Gaga is being paid $12 million for the film. The budget has kind of blown up to $200 million somehow, even though the first film only cost $60 million. But it made $1 billion and was the highest grossing R-rated film of all time. So Warner Brothers is like freely spending. How do we make this the best thing ever? It's going to be a musical, which it always astounds me because people really, it's an industry thing and a theater thing that people like musicals. Regular people kind of don't like musicals. Like, they'll go to it, but, you know, it's not something people are craving. But hey, if it makes it different, you know, the first movie was banal and boring, but, you know, it looked nice and had good performances. I didn't like, and you can see my review on filmgamer.com, I didn't like Joker that much, but, you know, it contributed something, even though it stole everything from Taxi Driver and King of Comedy, which I recently watched and wasn't good anyways. So it'll be interesting to see. I'll look forward to it. I'm sure it'll be an entertaining discussion. Moving on, Warner Brothers a couple months ago signed Tom Cruise first look deal, sort of thing, and he's going to have an office on the Warner Brothers lot. Tom Cruise currently lives in London, and so if he's going to have an office at Warner Brothers, he will be moving back to LA, which is a big deal. And it was announced today that Tom Cruise has been cast in Alejandro González Iñárritu's next film. Alejandro won back-to-back Best Director Oscars for The Revenant and Birdman, which also won Best Picture. Birdman came first, and then he followed that up with The Revenant, which got Leonardo DiCaprio, undeservedly so, even though he's a good actor, his first Oscar, which frankly annoyed me because people were like, oh, he's snubbed, and he's just, every year somebody was better, except for when he played Gilbert Grape. But nonetheless, I digress. Alejandro is a very interesting storyteller. I haven't seen Bardo, but man, if you look at the trailer for it, it's just visually striking. He's a very visually striking director, and I can't wait to see what Tom Cruise does with him, because Tom Cruise worked with Stanley Kubrick on Eyes Wide Shut. He worked with Martin Scorsese on The Color of Money. He's worked with Spielberg twice. He's worked with all the best directors and usually brings out the best in them. So I'm happy to see him transition from, you know, action to maybe something action adjacent, maybe an epic. We don't know, but I'll be very interested in it. And it's currently suspected to be an English language movie. Now, Alejandro's previous collaborator, Leonardo DiCaprio, is currently making the next Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which costs $100 million, which is such a funny head scratcher because no Paul Thomas Anderson movie has ever grossed more than $80 million. He's the definition of niche, but people like working with him, and his movies are acclaimed. I didn't like Licorice Pizza, but for MGM, which was at the time run by Michael DeLuca and Pamela Abdy, who currently run Warner Brothers Film Division, they got nominated for Best Picture. And that was MGM's first Best Picture nomination since Rain Man. So they were thrilled. And Paul Thomas Anderson just basically did it himself. He got Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Screenplay. So good for him. They're spending a lot. I don't think Leo should have taken $20 million. We know he has a hell of an agent. But after Killers of the Flower Moon, I'd say that maxed him out. I mean, come on, bring the budget down on this. Leo isn't worth it really anymore because he's been so picky. He's still a very good actor, and what he did for The Revenant. Like, he's basically the reason that movie was made. But he wasn't even the best performance in that movie. Tom Hardy was the best performance in that movie and would have been a great Academy Award winner for it. But nonetheless, of course, I'll be watching this movie. Leonardo DiCaprio still challenges himself and is a bit too self-serious, even though he's a pretty funny guy. Like, the best parts of his performance in Killers of the Flower Moon are him making jokes or riffing or ad-libbing, which apparently Martin Scorsese told him not to do. We don't need all that, he said. But watching the movie, it was one of the few good parts of it. But anyways, the thought with Warner Brothers spending big on Joker and a Tom Cruise partnership and $100 million on a PTA movie, it's seen as though it's been read that in April, some sort of agreement that Warner Brothers Discovery has lapses so that they can then be sold to another company, which, God forbid, would be Comcast, or which is Universal Pictures. So then we'd have another mega media merger, which A, is a nightmare, B, would compound debt and would cause a lot of headaches for regulators and sales and everything, definitely leading to lost jobs and, most importantly, fewer movies, which I don't want to see at all. So hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully we can all just make movies separately. If they wanted to be bought, maybe they could be bought by a venture capital firm or something, because that's like the only group that could afford it. Yeah. So Zaslav, if you're listening to this podcast, God forbid, stay as independent as you can be with this stuff. Don't just sell out, because, you're better than that. You said when you took over this that you wanted to celebrate the big movies, and the way you said it rankled a lot of feathers, but what am I saying? Ruffled a lot of feathers. But go big on theatrical, and in order to go big on theatrical, you gotta stay independent. So cut your salary a bit. I'm just kidding. I don't expect that of you. I don't expect that to ever happen. But moving on to gaming news, Nintendo had a Direct, and Star Wars Battlefront Classic came out. This is done by Aspyr, or Asper. I'm pretty sure it's Aspyr, the same company that recently did the Tomb Raider trilogy remastered, and that came out on all of the platforms. And now Battlefront Classic, which includes Battlefront 1 and 2 and all the extra maps. I loved this game as a kid, played it tons, both versions, had it on PlayStation 2. It's a type of game that EA tried to replicate and failed to do, but Aspyr is coming out with it on all major platforms, including last gen. So if you have just an Xbox One, if you have just a PlayStation 4, you can play this. Of course, it's coming out on Nintendo Switch and PC, 64-player online at launch. So I think, especially given its discounted nature, it's about half price, that this could really be a feather in the cap for Bob Iger, who mentioned he wants to get back into video games, especially after their investment in Epic Games. It's just kind of funny because he shuttered LucasArts and Disney Interactive Studios, who made the previous Star Wars games, and as well, one of my favorites, Split Second. However, the timing of this comes about 2 weeks before the fiscal quarter ends, so I'm sure if it'll be a success, of course, the games industry will be there to hear about it, and he'll mention it, especially if it does well, at the quarterly or yearly review. Moving on with that Nintendo Direct, they also mentioned 4 Xbox games that are coming to Nintendo, and we later figured out PlayStation. They are Pentiment, Sea of Thieves, Hi-Fi Rush, and Grounded. 2 of those are community-based games, a few of them are co-op games, and then there's Hi-Fi Rush, over a year old, and it'll be great, especially with Sea of Thieves, for people to join the community and Xbox to expand like they said they were going to do. Yeah, it sucks, especially if you're an Xbox owner. I decided, based on the article that I wrote, that I wouldn't buy a next gen Xbox because I wanted the Series X. But I opened up the Xbox and there was an ad, and I didn't like that at all. So I'm gonna get a PlayStation 5 when I can afford it, which won't be for a long time, anytime in the foreseeable future, because it costs like $650 Canadian plus tax, and I just can't afford that anytime soon. So if I have to buy a console, it'll be one. Um, I don't think I'll upgrade my PC because I just can't get into it. I don't have the right setup. It's a weak setup and it's hard to stay there, and it's not isolating enough. That all sounds a bit weird, but I won't get into it. I can write an article later on if you want me to hear it. But nonetheless, Xbox is coming to more platforms because essentially they bought a company, took on a lot of debt, and they need to make that investment back because they want to please the shareholders. So, post Activision Blizzard, I'm sure most of those games are going to stay multi platform, and this is going to be multi platform. And PlayStation 2 wants to expand to PC more, and we've seen that with Helldivers, which they published, and that's on PC. And they want to do more simultaneous releases like that and expand their audience because games, particularly in the console division, haven't really expanded, including Nintendo's 140 million Switches, and you have PlayStation's 60 million consoles. So you have like 200 there, and then you have about less than 30 million Xbox Series consoles, and then a lot of people are still hanging on from last gen. But it's capped at about 250 million, so they need to bring more people back. And post-pandemic, the studies have shown that that bubble is getting smaller and smaller again, and will essentially go away, float away and pop, because the pandemic is over. Even though people are still getting sick, people have stopped spending in the amount that they did when the pandemic started. So they got to figure out a way to get that money back. And that's what's most important, because we're all scraping for money. Me, to finish off here, I did change my phone bill, which I have been known to do. I previously went from Fido, who was just a brutal introduction to the phone world, into Kudo, which is owned by TELUS, and they were pretty good until the pandemic. I paid $22.50 a month, which is the cheapest phone plan that I know of, and then they upped it to $5, and I'm like, well, okay, 10 years of the same prices. It's what it is, I guess. I was resigned to it. I was going to let it go. I topped up, got a bit of data. And then they upped it by another $5. And as with the pandemic and price increases, companies in particular, do not give reasons anymore or rationale to their price increases. It's just like, yeah, the price is going up. No dispute, no nothing. This is just what you're expected to pay now. And I think it's ridiculous, and I wasn't going to stand for it. So I went to Virgin Mobile, who, unfortunately for me and any Virgin Mobile customer and any Canadian, if you know, is owned by Bell now. They bought the license to it in Canada. And Bell, as we all know, is a terrible company. So the way it was set up was I went into Staples, which I like, and I still had my existing phone plan, and they just set me up with a new phone. Well, unfortunately, taking out the SIM card tray broke, so we had to figure out how to do an eSIM. And in order to do that, they had to set up on the phone that I'm using now. And in order to do that, they had to turn the data on. And in addition to that, there was also a $60 connection fee I had to pay. So I had to pay $60 plus a $20 data fee that was added to my existing $30 bill, and I was expected to pay that within a week. And so, as I constantly do for every single issue that I have, which again is mostly digital. I fire it up on Twitter and I reach out to the DMs and I say, I'm not a satisfied customer. And they say, oh dear, let us fix that for you. And the trouble is that it's becoming less and less, oh dear, this shouldn't happen, and more just expected that I'd fight for it. And it's something that millennials are being taken advantage of for way too much, that we're just expected to fight for basic stuff now. And worse, you have people on Twitter, these bootlicker shills that are just kind of on the side of a company who does not know that they exist. They're on the side of terrible celebrities who do not know they exist. They're being fed Putin propaganda and swallowing it from Tucker Carlson, and it's just disconcerting because these people aren't interested in the hobbies that they're interested in. They're fake fans. They don't like the people that they even cover. They don't even like the celebrities they want to cover. They just want to win and be right, and they think by being right that it just means to yell at you and call you names. And I'm a bit old school, which is weird for me to say. I'm 30, but I still say what I mean on the internet. And you got to be a bit more careful, which fortunately I don't have to worry about because I'm not a bigot. But you have to be a bit more careful now because people are meaner, they're nastier, they can find out more about you. But I'm staying brave, I guess. I'll shout at somebody, I'll tell them their opinion is bad. As long as you can do it in an honest and intelligent way, I find that if you're mean about it, then that doesn't play. You try and say an insult or I don't like that person or just, poo-poo the argument, then that doesn't work because, it's negativity. And negativity is good when it's clever or it's a popular opinion. But if you have an opinion of your own, it's very difficult to express that if you don't have your own thoughts. You don't have a backbone. So I expressed and stood up for myself using my backbone with Virgin Mobile, and I ended up getting that $120 bill reduced to $30. Do I get any thanks? No. It's like, why are you doing business with Bell? You're asking for trouble. Yes, I know. But I had to show Kudo that I was willing to go somewhere else. And you know what I find so fascinating is that there are things that I do, even if I don't tell somebody, just as a trend to myself. If I do it, then someone else will do it. And I don't even have to tell them. People, it's just like an inherent thing. People kind of discover on their own, like, Tubi. I didn't see a commercial for Tubi until last year's Super Bowl, but I had it well before then, and people slowly gather more to it. It's like a word of mouth thing, but it's also a universal human subconscious. I can do an episode of it maybe on the Poets podcast if we're still doing that, if you guys want. So let me know, out of all the types of podcasts that I do with my brother Nick, those were the more thoughtful ones that we started at the beginning, with Eric that's going to the movies, or with Murph and the Poets. Let me know who you want me to have as a guest. But that pretty much wraps it up for me. In terms of personal developments, I'm reading a script right now from a screenwriter on Twitter named Tim Westland, who was very kind to give me a script of his to read just, for fun. Although I think, honestly, if I like it, I will try and develop it with the local Kingston chapter and tourism board and say, hey, this is a well-written script, which from what I've read so far, it is. It's properly written. It's distinctive, and I'll send it their way and say, hey, this is something to pay attention to, and then, apply for all those grants, and then come back to these guys and say, hey, I can make your movie, and then, that can be my career, rather than, sitting in my parents' basement at this podcast that, a few hundred people listen to. So if you have any questions about this week's news stories, or you want to hear more, or you want to hear me talk about something more, be sure to let me know. You can listen to my podcast on Spotify or wherever podcasts are. They're now on YouTube, which has been great, especially for my channel. My YouTube channel and my podcast kind of merged together. I just got to figure out a way to draw that all back into my website. And the likely next topic that we'll talk about next time I do this podcast will be on the Oscars, because I'm trying to cook up a few articles to write about. So I'll probably do that, or maybe I'll do a bit of game streaming and talk about that. So you'll just have to tune in. All right. Take care. Bye-bye then. Until next week.